Thank you.
It's great, Gamze, to be with you in Turkey. I'm incredibly fond of Istanbul. I have many, many wonderful experiences. I dance tango in Istanbul because tango is one of the best places outside Buenos Aires to find fantastic tango dancers. So coaching and tango, I'm in heaven. And delighted because, Gamze, you're a partner with AoEC in Turkey, and delighted to be offering this workshop as part of International Coaching Week. And of course, we're recording the session because there is so much happening, which is fantastic, that people have said, can you record and we can watch later. So thank you very much. And we are doing 45 minutes, I think. Is that right, Gamze?
Okay.
Yeah. 45 minutes. I get carried away, so probably we'll run over 45 minutes. But let's launch. Okay. So intuition. I mean, it's fascinating. And I call it a hidden power, because there is so much that we can use here in our internal response, this intuition, this instinct. And it's very difficult to find any really theoretical underpinning to this idea. But Gestalt, which is my background, being a Gestalt practitioner for 45 years, been a Gestalt psychotherapist and then a Gestalt consultant, set up the Academy of Executive Coaching, which was about integrating some of Gestalt into coaching practice. And now, from there, 25 years later, focusing back again, specifically on a Gestalt approach. But I'm going to introduce you to the Gestalt underpinning, because I think there's a practical theoretical framework here that makes this idea of intuition much more accessible than it is in general coaching theory and practice. Now, here's a question. So what do you do if you have a strong intuitive, you have a gut reaction to your coaching? And maybe if you would like to put in chat what your reaction is, because this is often a question that comes up in supervision. You discover that you have lost interest in your client, or you start to feel a bit irritated, or yes, your stomach gets queasy. Yes, but then what do you do with it? That's the question. So you have this reaction, in this case, stomach gets queasy, maybe a feeling of frustration, or a feeling of being lost or stuck. Isn't this very familiar to you? So we've got different reactions, but what do you do with this? Yes, yes, you've got an impatience to share it. But that's a problem, because we're traditionally in coaching, we're expected to focus on the client, not ourselves. So this is the traditional way of working. And the Gestalt approach almost goes to the opposite extreme, and and I'll explain that in a moment. But let's continue here and let's see. So we have a strong reaction or any sort of internal response. What do we do with it? And most people, as Gamze said, she tells sometimes. So there's for you, Gamze, it's a choice, an interesting. When do you choose, and what do you choose, and how do you choose to say it? And in actual fact, that's the key bit, is in how you communicate it. Yes. So Emmett shares you share your feelings. That's quite unusual, to share your feelings. So let's see, what's the basis of that? So let's see if we can break it down a little bit. I went on the internet and just got a few definitions from Psychology Today, Wikipedia. So it's the ability to understand something instinctively. Now, the problem with that is then what is instinct? But the important bit is without the need for conscious or logical reasoning or explanation. So that's important. We'll see how it fits in with the others. Some sort of natural ability, some ability, very vague, a reaction that helps you decide or react without thinking. So notice that in these two, we don't need our rational, logical side of our brain, our right-hand side of our brain. This is so far, in neurological terms, our right brain hemisphere. I'm getting myself mixed up. Left brain is our rational thinking. Right brain is our emotional bit. And here's another one, a feeling in your gut. And people often talk about having a gut reaction that guides your decisions. So based on some sort of deep-seated knowledge and experience. So it's some sort of experience. Again, not using cognition, not thinking, but it's something else that comes from our internal ability. But you see, it's still very vague. What do we mean by that? Now, this is a framework that I have developed and I find very useful in explaining our coaching practice. Other people are picking this up and you'll see it in various versions. Basically, we can either think and do stuff, or we're in another sort of domain, the feeling and the being side of our engagement. Let me explain a little bit more about that. So the thinking and the doing is about taking action. You've got a problem, excuse me, you're listening to this webinar, you're thinking about it, you're making notes, you're taking action here. And in the end, hopefully making use of this material, you will perform differently. You will learn something and it will influence how you act, you perform. This is traditional performance coaching. You're looking for an output and an objective. It's evidence-based because it's behavioral. And it's illogical. We ask questions. And generally, the most of our questions are about. Sometimes we ask about our feelings, but it's still almost an analysis of how we feel rather than an engagement with the experience. So this is the one side of the thing. And of course, we can tend to think that because it's performance coaching, this is it. You know, the GROW model. What's your goal? What's the reality? What's GR options and way forward? But it's only half the story. The other side is about feeling and being. So it's not about doing something, it's about accepting who you are. And rather than acting differently, it's about being more myself. Okay? This is our developmental, our intuitive coaching. Now, you may not think that you do this that much, but think of active listening. So what are you doing when you're active listening? You're being present. You're simply accepting the person as they are and reflecting back. You're being with them, responding to their expression of who they are. And the fascinating thing is then change happens. You don't have to do anything other than be present. And in that moment, the client opens up and shares a bit more. You might ask the question, say more, because you're inviting them to deepen their exploration of who they are in the moment, to be more of who you are. Not at this stage trying to do anything except accepting in our, obviously, non-judgmental way. We're not having an opinions, ideas. We're not asking questions particularly. We're just being there. Good old Carl Rogers, unconditional positive regard. Now, what we are going to do is focus on the feeling and the being, the developmental, the intuitive side. That's our focus here. Not that all of our performance, thinking, doing stuff is irrelevant. Ideally, then what you're doing is the ability to flow between the two. So be able to share your feelings, share your reactions, and then have some choice about when you do that, as opposed to asking questions or focusing on some sort of output. So we're focusing very much on the yellow, green, being, doing, intuitive, because that's what we're here to discuss, the intuitive side of our coaching practice. So based on that, there's another aspect that's very strong in Gestalt, which we call use of self. And another nice expression, use of self as an instrument of change. And it's about how do we use our internal responses, our intuition, our instincts in service of the client's growth, progress. And I often use the metaphor of an instrument, a guitar, a violin here, where the client is like plucking the strings of your being, and it's resonating within you, and this stimulates this intuition, this instinct, and I'll share with you now a little bit more about that in a moment. But let's look at, when we're looking at awareness of who we are, I have created this very simple model, which I find works really well to guide us in our coaching practice. So first of all, we perceive the world through our senses: hear, see, touch, taste, smell. As coaches, of course, we use seeing and hearing, but of course, if you were a chef, tasting and smelling would be your primary mode of connection. And if you are a masseur, then of course, touch would be your primary sense that you would use. So we see and hear, and that of course evokes a reaction. We hear the alarm go off and we move. We see someone smile and we smile back. So we have a reaction based on what we see and hear. And of course, it's the basis of our active listening. We see and we hear and we respond. The other domain of awareness is how we feel. Now, what's really useful here, and again, not particularly well expressed, maybe in the more somatic areas of coaching embodiment. This is more the idea that our physical and emotional responses are absolutely connected. We cannot have an emotional response without a physical reaction. In fact, we know our emotions because they happen in our bodies. We cannot emotionally experience in our brain. I'm not going to argue with any neuroscientists about this, but for this, on the simple terms, our brains, the right side of our brain experiences our emotions through the experience. When we are feeling upset, we can experience the upsetness, tears behind our eyes, clogging up in our nose, tightness in our throat and our chest. Now, what we start to use in terms of our intuition is paying attention to both that internal response in our bodies and our emotional state as well. So our physical and emotional response. And that connects then really with our client's emotional and physical response. And your interventions then start to flow in terms of experience. This is how we experience. And of course, this affects how we respond. If someone expresses an angry feeling or an upset feeling, we have an emotional response. We respond with anger, we respond with fear. And you notice the little cartoon characters here. We can tell roughly how they're feeling by their physical posture. Yeah, quite simple. And of course, we all use emojis. as a shorthand for expressing how we feel. And those are just simply, most of them are facial expressions, but there are some physical body ones. But this is really, really significant and really important to us understanding how we use ourselves as an instrument. Then, of course, our cognition, key part of our coaching practice. So perceiving through our senses, our feelings, emotional and physical, our thinking, and that all feeds in. So these are the 4 domains. And ICF, AMCC have equivalents here, but this is one of 7.8, identify factors that influence future patterns, current, we're more interested in current patterns, behavior, perception, feeling, and emotion. So it's there encapsulated in that. So what we are interested in is the intuitive side of this, which means we take away, as it says at the beginning, we take away our cognition. We suspend our thinking, and we're basically in the triangle of perceiving, feeling, and reacting. Now, there is one ICF competency, and again, I'm talking to Lewis here, former president of AMCC, and we were just saying I need to get the EMCC equivalent. But here is the one in ICF, use of awareness of oneself, so awareness of yourself and one's intuition for the benefit of the client. No real explanation about what this intuition is, but it's there, 2.5. So you have permission. Your ICF markers will actually give you a tick in the box if you use your intuition clearly. Okay, so let's see. What is this intuition? Well, I prefer the word resonate. And I use this little image. This is not a coaching client interaction, I have to say here. But it's a mother. We hear talk about a mother's intuition or a mother's instinct. Now, obviously, the baby has no cognition, so you can't engage on that cognitive level. So you have to use your bodily, physical, and emotional response. Now, obviously, I'm not saying you treat your client like a baby, but what I'm encouraging you to do is access that connection in yourself. It's as if you're connecting with that very primitive early part that doesn't have words, that doesn't need words, it doesn't need understanding, it doesn't need a rationality. So this is the domain that we're working on. And I love this picture because, I know it as a father, as a grandfather, I know this very profound experience, this amazing connection when you don't have cognition. That's not available to you. So let's see how we'd evolve with that. So I've got a couple of ICF competencies that support this, and EMCC will have equivalent competencies, and I'll bring those forward at another time. So here we are, excuse me, 4.6. This is really interesting. It's about demonstrating openness and transparency. So don't forget, intuition is about sharing something which you're not thinking about. Now, generally, it's safer to use our heads because we can think. But actually, when we start to use our vulnerability, I mean, how often are you taught in your coaching practice to be vulnerable? Now, not many of us go there unless you're involved in Gestalt or some of the other embodiment practices. The bulk of Gestalt, the bulk of coaching is performance-oriented, and it's about using your brain, which is not usually about being vulnerable. And of course, ICF are suggesting that this builds trust when we are open and transparent and we're using ourselves. Here's another one. I think this is fascinating. Shares observations, insights, and feelings. Okay. So we're still in the domain of using your intuition, your feelings, your instincts, but without attachment. And this is the key factor here. Very much a sort of mindfulness, especially a Buddhist perspective, non-attachment, that we engage without expectations and potentially create new learning for the client. But here, enshrined in the ICF competencies, which are hugely performance driven. Out of 37 competencies, we've basically got 3 or 4 that give us permission, as it were, to use our intuition, to be vulnerable. Because if you start to share your intuition, you're sharing something of yourself. Who am I? This is my reaction. This is my gut sense of what's going on with me in the relationship. And this is where we'll talk a bit more about it. So Gestalt has a great explanation for this. Explain intuition, or as I prefer to call it, resonance. I think the word resonance gives us much more freedom and permission to engage in these areas. So here are 5 areas that support this idea of using our intuition, or as I call it, our resonance. So one of our very technical parts on Gestalt is called field theory. The idea being that the world is in constant movement, flux. This is what we talk about, our VUCA world. Everything right now, we're constantly forming and reforming. I'm working my way through the slide presentation. It's constantly changing. You're changing. You're listening to me. You're thinking, you're feeling everything. You're either bored, you're excited, you're eating something, you're doing your emails while this is going. Something is happening. We're always changing, forming and reforming. We are constantly being influenced and influence our world. Whatever's going on here, I am influencing you, and those of you who are on the screen are influencing me. I'm looking here at the people. Are they looking bored? Are they looking interested? Are they smiling? You know, are they excited? That influences me in my engagement with you. Though, of course, if you're listening to this as a recording, I'm influencing you, but you're not influencing me because I'm not there. I'm way doing something else, forming and reforming somewhere else in my life. So our notion of health is our ability to creatively adjust to this constant movement. Now, if you want to meet a guru, an absolute master of this ability to adjust to change, I'm fortunate to be able to tell you that I know of one that you can easily access. So anybody under the age of 2, okay? So find anybody under the age of 2 and watch how they constantly adjust to the moment. They're not thinking. They're laughing, they're crying, they're having a tantrum, they're smiling, they're coming to give you a hug, they're pushing you away, constantly adjusting to the world as they experience it with you and everybody around them. So they are the masters. Now, what happens to us as adults? We learn to conform, we learn to adapt, and of course, we teach our children that it's not acceptable to chuck your food across the table when you're having a tantrum. So you learn to manage your emotions, you learn to manage that impulse. That's why I say generally after the age of 2, you have learned, our children have learned to adapt to our society in a particular way. Now, the problem is that we over-adapt and we forget that when we are adults, that we still know that we shouldn't throw our food across the table, but we may feel that we should eat it all even though we don't like it. You know, we've had an injunction from our parents, you must finish your plate, so you eat it regardless of whether your stomach is full or not. So the problem is that we cease to be able to flow, to adjust to our world, because we build up unconscious habits and behaviors. So the first of our ideas in this instinct is allowing the flow, the emergence of our internal reaction, allowing those to form and reform in the relationship with our coachee. Now, Gestalt has an interesting definition of self. Technically, we call it a system of contacts. Again, connected to this field theory, who we are is shaped by what we call the field, the environment. Field theory, the environment. We're constantly changing and adapting. This is our self. In South Africa, in Zulu language, they have this term Ubuntu, which means I am because you are. Who you are shapes who I am. And myself, many other definitions of self, like character, is a fixed form. Like if we look at MBTI, we've got the personality types. Our definition is that self is the ability to constantly emerge and adapt. Now, I'm here in this context with you, and I'm the self is my guru, expert, Gestalt bit, talking about intuition. If my grandson bursts in the door, which has happened, fortunately he's at school, so I know that's not going to happen now, but then immediately who I myself would change as I engage with my 7-year-old. It's his birthday today, so I'm just remembering the delight of who I was at breakfast time this morning. So our notion of self. Now, the other important part is this idea of contact and dialogue. And Martin Buber talked about this as I, thou, rather than I, it. So what we know about Gestalt and many aspects of coaching, it's about being in a relationship. It's a relational approach. It's about having courageous conversations, about thinking and feeling together. Don't forget, your intuition is your experience in response to the client. So something is happening together. Of course, as good coaches, you always come with an open research and development attitude. We're curious. We've got our ideas. We've got our questions. We've got our ideas. But we are there to be curious. We're not judgmental. We're open to being researchers. Very much a key part of Gestalt practice. And this comes from humanistic psychology, Carl Rogers' unconditional positive regard. We're two equal human beings engaged in this relationship. And then this is the bit that ICF are encouraging in their 7.11, bring your whole self into the relationship. Yourself as an instrument of change, your intuition. But in that process, if you bring yourself, you have to be changed in the process. You have to allow your coachee to impact you as the coach. And this is why it becomes courageous. This intuitive stuff, Gestalt, doesn't require a lot of thought, but it does require a lot of courage. Two components of Gestalt that are significant here. This notion of projection. So when we are projecting something, as most of you will know this term and usable English, it's all about, it's you out there. So there's you inside yourself with the sensing, feeling, and thinking. There's the other person out there. Here I am, here you are. And what I'm doing is I am focusing all my attention on you. It's out there. You are the one. Now, where constructive projection is when we project our ideas, feedback, empathy, resonance, intuition. We are saying this is what's going on out there. And because we're in a relationship, it's something to do with you. Okay. The dysfunctional side of this is when we get into blame, judging. It's your opinion, imposing, bullying. Also, hero worship. celebrity admiration. We are projecting the greatness onto somebody else, or are we projecting the problem onto somebody else? It's somebody else's fault. Now, one of the things that I think, anyway, we get into a little bit of a hole about, and I have a really allergic reaction to, is a client being resistant. The client is resisting your interventions. Now, that's a projection because you're projecting the idea that they are resisting. But what about the fact is you just not got the right intervention? Okay. You've offered something that isn't palatable. You're trying to stuff some food down the child's throat and they don't want to eat it. Well, you stop stuffing, find a different intervention. If the client isn't willing to follow you, let's look at what's going on in the relationship rather than labeling, judging the client as resisting. Anyway, that's a hobby horse of mine. We'll come back to later at another time. The other interesting element of Gestalt theory is this notion of confluence. And in geography, confluence is the meeting of two rivers. Two rivers meet and become one. So we're merging. In Gestalt, we call the contact boundary. When we meet, we connect. That's our exploration, the way we connect with the other. And then if we connect and merge, let me show you inside. Here's you, inside yourself, outside yourself, and then this sort of merging that happens. And there's a dysfunctional side here. Loss of self. And you remember not so long ago, the storming of Capitol Hill in Washington. Now, at all of the hearings, people are saying, oh no, I got carried away. It wasn't really me. I didn't mean it. I just got swept along with the crowd and I did things that I really didn't want to do. Justifications for their bad behavior. But that idea, I have lost my self-identity and I am being carried along the merge of two rivers. And it's not my fault, it's ours. Now, of course, that's the dysfunctional side. The creative side is teamwork. We surrender who we are. We are empathic. We begin to feel. And here we have, again, intuition, gut reaction. We merge with our clients and we have this notion of resonance. Now, when I was a young psychotherapist, I had this strange sensation. I would welcome my client into the room and they'd be smiling, so how are you, all the rest of it. And I'd start to feel anxious. And as a young psychotherapist, I think, oh my goodness, what's the matter? Am I worried? Am I not feeling good enough? Is there something else going on? What's the matter? And I would I would blame myself for my anxiety, my uncertainty. The strange thing I discovered when I paid attention is later on in the session, the client would invariably say, do you know, I was feeling, on the one level, I was feeling pleased to be here, but actually I was really feeling quite anxious when I arrived. And I think, oh, so what was going on there? I was feeling something that they were not quite aware of. So in that moment of what I would call creative confluence, I was kind of feeling their feelings. Now, in Gestalt, we cannot feel somebody else's feelings. But if we have this notion of resonance, that we're vibrating together, we begin to have these sensations, now traditionally called intuition or gut reaction. I had this anxiety that was a reflection, a mirror. In Gestalt terms, a confluence, I call it a creative confluence. And later I called this idea, this resonance with the other. Now, this is supported brilliantly by a guy called Arnie Beiser, who created the wonderful saying, change occurs when you become who you are rather than being something you're not. Beautiful, poetic. I've rewritten it, adapted it, because I think this explains it a little bit easier, at least in terms of my theoretical frame. Change happens when you accept who you are. Remember the being, the feeling, accepting, your active listening. Change happens. We don't have to make it happen. It happens when we accept who we are. And then this is the doing part. Change is effort if you want to be different. Yeah, go for it. Fake it till you make it. That's our, behavioral expression. Loads and loads of behavioral techniques about how to behave differently, and eventually you'll get there. But this is not what we are doing. We are working with something else. We're working with intuition. We're working with our internal response to who you are. So what is this, this somatic resonance? It's about reflecting back. So reflecting back your emotional, your physical and emotional response. So the intervention is sharing that. Now, there are particular ways of doing this that make it less personal, because the idea here is not that you are here to do your own therapy or your own coaching and you're simply here to tell stories about yourself. That's not the point of this. The point is that you are responding to your client in this intuitive gut resonance way. So you are resonating in the relationship with your client. In that case, what I'm encouraging you to do is respond with what you notice, what you see and perceive, what you notice about yourself, what you're aware of, and coming at it with curiosity. It's interesting that. So you would say, I notice, and then you talk about it as my emotional reaction. What I'm saying, what you're saying impacts me. Because don't forget, we're not saying this is necessarily happening to the other person. We're saying that, we're in this relationship together, and this is the impact that it's having on me. Now, I'm curious, is that something that's happening in you as well? Okay. So I'm aware. I feel in my body, what's it like for you? It's interesting. I feel emotions. So this is the element that I am encouraging you. This is the use of intuition. Now, I don't know whether I have a volunteer here amongst my audience who are willing to do a little experiment with me and share something about themselves so I can demonstrate this approach in action. Of course, I'm now dependent on someone here to put their hand up and say, yes, I would like the chance of a lifetime to work with the guru of intuition. Let me stop sharing here.